best lenses for you will very much depend on what you like to shoot, how you like to shoot, and your preferred look. Some of you will prefer fast wide prime, some of you will prefer that mid-range zoom to get that versatility, and others, like myself, will just want to try them all, because fun. So when I'm talking about my favourite Micro Four Thirds lenses, I'm not saying that these are the best lenses, they're just the best lenses for my particular brand of nonsense. So let's get into the lenses in no particular order, but I'm going to start with one that I think many Micro Four Thirds users will agree is pretty much a must-have for the system. The Olympus M Zuiko 45mm f1.8. Now, it's a common understanding that lenses generally fall into one or two of the three categories: fast, good, and cheap. Occasionally though, we do get lenses that meet all three. Now, I think it's safe to say that the full frame Nifty 50s usually fit all three of these categories, but beyond that, you're usually missing out on one or more. With the Olympus 45mm f1.8 though, you're definitely getting all three. So taking into account the 2x crop of the Micro Four Thirds system, this 45mm gives you a full frame equivalent of a 90mm, which allows you to get some really nice subject separation. Add that to that 1.8 aperture and this makes a great lens even in low light because it's actually quite sharp even wide open. Now, I bought this one because it's like the perfect focal length for how I have come to like to shoot street. And and it's not just street, I like to isolate a subject. I don't like too much unnecessary space and mess in my composition. So this lens allows me to get that isolation. To me, this just ticks all of the boxes. It's fast, it's good, it's cheap, and in the spirit of Micro Four Thirds, it's absolutely tiny. So even if your bag is chock full, there's still going to be room for the 45. Mine has recently been living on my Pen Mini, which makes for a fantastic pocketable setup that's going to produce fantastic results. Now, at the time of recording this video, brand new, you can pick this up for about £200, £250, depending on whether you want the black or the silver version. And on the used market, you can get these all day long between £80 and about £140. But yeah, definitely a must-have for the Micro Four Thirds system. Okay, lens number two is the lens that has quickly become my everything lens for both photograph and video, mainly down to just how versatile this thing is. It's the Panasonic Leica DG Vario Elmarit 12 to 60mm f2.8 to f4. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue? Now with the 45 I mentioned the fast, good and cheap thing. Now arguably this really only fits into the good category, but it is like very good. Now many people like to get the trinity of lenses when they get into a new system or whatever. I never did. For most of what I shot when I was shooting with full frame Nikon, it was a 24 to 105 f4, and that pretty much did me for everything. It was pretty much the one and done lens for that system for me, based on what I was shooting at the time. And if I wanted to be a little bit wider, I would just pano it. Now, my thinking behind the 12 to 60 was that it could be my one and done lens. It's fast enough for what I need. It gives you that great range of the 24 to 120 full frame equivalent. And yeah, it's just become, for most of my photo and video work, this has just become it, the one lens. Now, there are the Panasonic alternatives to this lens. There is version 1 and version 2, but a lot of the things I read at the time of buying this indicated that the Lumix version was a little bit soft after 40mm, and of course I bought this lens for that range, otherwise I would have just bought the 12 to 35. So yeah, this is why I was willing to pay that little bit extra money to get this version. Now, if the extra reach isn't something you really care about or need, there is the 12 to 35 from Lumix, which is a constant f2.8, or there is the 12 to 40 from Olympus, which is also a constant 2.8. Now, a few more things to mention before moving on to the next lens. It's weather sealed, it's stabilized, and has a pretty nice minimum focus distance of 0.24 meters, or about 10 inches at the tele end, and 0.2 meters, or about 8 inches at the wide end. Now, I really do like this lens. I've used it for everything from street to astrophotography, and despite it being big, in Micro Four Thirds terms at least, it never feels like it's too much. Even on a tiny little camera like the Pen Mini, it's a good lens, it feels alright. Next up we have a lens that I recently made a video about, so I'm going to keep this brief. It's the 40 to 150 variable aperture from Olympus. This is the one with all the letters on it. EDMSCR. Now, I think everybody should have a zoom like this. It embodies everything. Now, I think everybody should have a zoom lens like this. This embodies, once again, everything that Micro Four Thirds is about, being small and light. And it fits 2 of our 3 on our triangle, being good and cheap. Not terribly fast, but that's a compromise you've got to make unless you want to pay a whole lot more for the Pro version. Now, I've always had a lens like this on every system I've ever had, and I think for those of us who aren't like super into shooting sports and wildlife and stuff, but still want the ability to do it if the opportunity arises, I think this is a great option rather than having to put a whole lot of cash into like a pro high-end, specific wildlife or sports lens. Again, there are variations of this lens. Lumix do a 45 to 150 and a 45 to 200, and there are variations of this Olympus 40 to 150. But yeah, there are plenty of options out there, and of course you can buy into the pro versions if you really are into that kind of thing. All right, so the last lens I want to talk about before I get into a couple of honourable mentions is a lens that I never actually intended to buy, but I'm so glad I did. Now, when I was building up my Micro Four Thirds kit, I followed the same formula I always do, and I skipped to super wide because it's not something I ever really use. Like I said before, if I want to go wider than 24, I just pano it. This time, however, I had video to consider, so just panoing a 24mm wasn't going to work. So I decided to look at the wide angle options for the system, something like the 9 to 18mm, but again, because I wanted to shoot video and I oftentimes shoot at night, I wanted something fast, which is where I started to encounter problems. The Olympus 7 to 14 f2.8, plenty fast enough, but no filter thread. Nope. The Lumix 7 to 14 f4, not terribly fast, and also no filter thread. Moving on. Then I started looking at the Leica Lumix 8 to 18 f2.8 to f4, which was fast enough where I wanted it at the wide end, and it had a filter thread. So I was like, yeah, awesome. Except one problem. I couldn't find one anywhere on the used market, at least in any other places where I normally shop, in other places I trust. So I thought, all right, it's fine. I'm in no rush for this thing. I'll wait a little bit. So we left it a week, 2 weeks, hoping that, they would restock. Nothing. So it was at this point I decided to start looking at prime lenses, and after borrowing Chris's Lauer 6mm f2, I was like, yeah, okay. But that was a little bit too wide to be anything for me other than an Astro lens, So I wanted something kind of, tighter than 6mm, but not quite as tight as 12, so middle ground, 9mm. This is the Lumix Leica 9mm f1.7, and I love it. So the first week I had this, I went out a few times and I got some images, and for somebody who generally likes to shoot quite a lot tighter, the images were spot on. A lens like this is perfect for getting in those larger scenes, for architecture and stuff like that, and of course for Astro, which I still haven't really had a good opportunity to do, but that's another story. And on top of that, it does exactly what I wanted it to do for video, and I've even started using it for some of my thumbnails, because it just looks fun. All right, on to a couple of honourable mentions, and you may have noticed in this list of my favourite lenses that there is no 20mm or 25mm, and that's because I bought this. This is the SLR Magic 25mm T0.95, and I bought this mainly for video, but as long as you avoid strong artificial light, coming directly into the lens, because this thing wide open does suffer from quite severe chromatic aberrations, it actually performs quite nicely if you get that nice balanced even light. Now, of course, that 0.95 aperture makes things very easy for video at night, especially on the Micro Four Thirds system. I love the system, but there's no getting away from physics. This thing doesn't perform as well as a full frame at higher ISOs, so adding a couple of stops of extra light from your 1.8s is a big advantage. Now, my final honourable mention fits right in between that 25mm and that 45mm Olympus f1.8, and it's this dinky little TT Artisan 35mm f1.4. Now, I've used a lot of TT Artisan lenses over the last couple of years. Their trio, the 17mm f1.4, the 35mm f1.4, and the 50mm f1.2 are absolutely fantastic given their price point. This one though, this is the best of the lot in my opinion. It's tiny, it's cheap, it's fast with that f1.4, and it's sharp at 1.4 as well, which is very impressive for a lens so cheap. And much like the 45mm, you don't even have to consider it. It's going in your back, it's tiny, you don't even need space for this thing. Alright, if there's any lenses here that I haven't mentioned, or alternatives that you prefer over the ones I have mentioned, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about them. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.